He stood under the golden lights of the ballroom, raising his champagne glass with an effortless smile. The crowd watched, enchanted, as he thanked his mentors, his colleagues, and even his dry cleaner. But not once did my name pass his lips. I was there at the edge of the gala near the coat check, wearing the same flats I had sewn patches onto the night before. He was wearing the suit I tailored for him stitch by stitch, overnight, after he called me in a panic that the store lost his order. I stayed up mending the lining, fixing the cuffs, pressing it perfectly while my dinner sat untouched. Now, here he was, basking in applause with his back to me like I was a distant shadow from another life. And then came the words, cold, sharp, deliberate. She did nothing for me. He didn't even flinch. I felt the air leave my chest as if I had been slapped. The woman next to me, unaware, smiled at his charm. I gripped the edge of the chair, not for support, but to keep from walking out. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I had spent years teaching myself how not to react. The room clapped louder. I adjusted the little pin I had sewn into his collar, my mother's, so it wouldn't slip. My fingers remembered every seam, every hidden reinforcement I had added so he wouldn't feel embarrassed in front of the elite. And now I was the embarrassment. Unseen, erased. But I stayed still. Because this was not over. Not yet. When the lights dimmed for the next speech, I finally exhaled. My hands were trembling, but no one noticed. Not even him. I watched him pose for photos, each flash bouncing off the fabric I had chosen. Each movement echoing the care I had put into making sure he felt important that night. I remembered how he used to call me his secret weapon, how he said no one believed in him like I did. Back then, he couldn't afford a second suit or even the confidence to walk into places like this. I was the one who wrote his first pitch deck, edited his emails late at night. SAT outside waiting while he practiced job interviews in borrowed offices. But I was also the one who reminded him to smile, to look people in the eye, to tie his shoelaces straight. All those invisible things that didn't make it to the speeches. I thought of the night he cried when he lost his mother and called me because no one else answered. I thought of the lasagna I made to coax him out of bed, the resume I restructured line by line, the dreams I pushed him toward. And yet now, here he was, standing under chandeliers I had never seen before, surrounded by people who never knew him when his jacket sleeves were too long. She did nothing for me. The words kept playing back, not just for their cruelty, but for the finality in his voice. Like I had been written out of the script entirely. But that night I wasn't going to stay behind the curtain. Not anymore. I stood up slowly. No rush, no chaos. My heels ached from standing backstage all night, but nothing hurt more than hearing him erase me so easily. I reached into my purse and pulled out the receipt from the tailor, the one I paid in full with my overtime hours and the handwritten note he once left me weeks ago. Thank you for everything. You're the reason I made it. That's what it said. I walked toward the edge of the ballroom stage. Crystal glasses clinked around me and people glanced with half smiles and polite confusion. When he saw me, mid-sentence with the mic still in his hand, something in his eyes flickered. Not recognition, guilt. The kind you try to swallow but can't when truth stares back. I handed him the folded paper and looked him in the eyes. You forgot this? I whispered. He didn't say a word. His grip on the mic tightened, but his voice didn't come. I stepped closer to the mic stand, gently adjusted it and said, calmly sometimes. The ones who stitch success into someone's life are the first to be cut from the picture. Then I stepped down. Not for applause, not for a reaction, just for truth. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. But I knew that silence I left behind would echo longer than his whole speech. Because the suit he wore was stitched with my care, my hands, my sacrifices, and the only thing he tailored was a lie. The first time I ever touched a needle and thread, it was for him. He was just a teenager. Then awkward shoulders, cheap ties, and dreams too big for our zip code. He had an audition for a school event and his only jacket had a torn sleeve. I stayed up that night watching tutorials on my cracked phone, stabbing my fingers more times than I could count. But when he walked in the next morning, his arms straight, his chin high, and said, Mom, they picked me. It was worth every drop of effort. That's how it started. School plays, college interviews, his first internship. Every time he needed to stand out, I was in the background, making sure his clothes didn't betray the poverty we came from. I remember once pawning my wedding ring just to buy him a proper suit for a scholarship dinner. He never asked me to, but he always knew. He'd say things like, no one else's mom could do what you do, or you make me look like I belong. Those words meant more than any award, and so I kept going, stitching, fixing, ironing every thread of support into his success. I was proud. I was invisible. Maybe, but proud. That's why, when I heard him say she did nothing for me, at that gala, Wearing the very suit I stayed up all night tailoring while fighting a fever, it didn't feel like a stab. It felt like unraveling, like a thread being pulled loose until everything I ever gave disappeared with it. And maybe that's what hurt the most, not the lie itself, but how easy it was for him to wear it. He walked past me that night like I was part of the wallpaper, the kind of passing that isn't cruel in action but deafening in silence. He shook hands, smiled for cameras, lifted his glass when they introduced him as a man who built his future from scratch. I watched from the back of the room, near the catering trays, holding the backup tie he almost forgot, still folded in my purse. The suit fit him perfectly. I had hemmed it with care, added a hidden stitch in the back to strengthen the seam, because I knew how long he'd be standing. I knew everything, how his shoes needed to be broken in, how his collar sat better with a second layer of interfacing. I knew because I made sure of it. I made sure of everything. But when his voice echoed over the speakers, thanking his mentors, his colleagues, his inner circle who carried him through every step, I kept waiting for that one word, that one glance, just a nod in my direction. But he looked through me like I was a ghost of a woman who never existed, a blur behind all his polished moments. And when his friend asked half-jokingly, "What about your mom?" he laughed and said, "She just hemmed pants." The room chuckled with him. My hands, still raw from the night before, trembled. I wasn't expecting applause. I wasn't even hoping for gratitude. But that dismissive chuckle, that sentence wrapped in a joke, it erased years of sacrifice with 4 words. And I stood there, a silent seam between his success and my stitching, wondering if he had truly forgotten, if pretending I never mattered made it easier to shine. I walked out before dessert, not in protest, not dramatically, but because something in me quietly snapped. The kind of break that doesn't scream, it whispers, "Enough." The night air felt sharp against my skin, and I realized I hadn't eaten all day. I had spent it ironing his shirt, sewing the last button with thread I'd dyed to match, driving across town to pick up the cufflinks he forgot existed. That's what I did, filled the spaces he never noticed were hollow. On the ride home, I thought of the first time he wore a suit, his school recital. He was 7. I had patched the knees of his pants the night before because he had fallen chasing the dog. He cried when I brushed his hair too tight, but he held my hand as he stepped on stage. And now, he walked across that ballroom stage without flinching. Remembering the woman who built the man, I sat in the kitchen when I got back, hands in my lap, still smelling of starch and stress. The TV was off. The silence sat beside me like a witness. I wasn't angry, not in the way people expect mothers to be when forgotten. I was hollowed, but not gone. That's when I opened the drawer, pulled out the envelope with the original receipt, the one with my name and the tailoring invoice, and I smiled, not because I needed revenge, but because someday someone would ask, and when they did, I wouldn't have to raise my voice. I'd just unfold the paper, point to the date, and say, I was there. I always was. I didn't attend the gala as a guest. I went as the woman behind the curtain, the one who pressed his collar flat, stitched the inner lining by hand, and steamed out every wrinkle from the suit he now wore like it had been gifted by royalty. When I saw him on stage, straight-backed and glowing under the chandeliers, my heart should have been full. Instead, it trembled. I was at the far end of the ballroom, holding a spare button in my palm just in case, still thinking like an assistant, still hoping he'd look my way, but he didn't, not once. He shook hands, kissed cheeks, and when someone complimented his appearance, I saw him laugh, saying, "Had to get it right. Big night, that was it." No mention of the hours I stayed up sewing under yellow kitchen light, or how I'd skipped sleep the week before just to finish the inner hem. I don't need flowers or spotlights. I never have. But respect, gratitude, just a glance in my direction. That shouldn't be too much, especially not from someone I believed in. The suit wasn't just fabric, it was time. It was love. It was belief stitched into every seam. But as I watched him accept his award with that flawless smile and arms raised, I realized something brutal. He didn't forget me. He erased me. There's a difference. And that's when it clicked. Not all tailoring is physical. Some people sew others into their lives quietly, while others rip those threads out the moment the applause starts. I stood quietly by the pillar, invisible in the very room I helped create, wondering how long I'd keep pretending this was enough. After the applause died down and the lights dimmed, I moved toward the back corridor, half hoping to escape before anyone recognized me. But I wasn't invisible to everyone. One of the older board members, Mr. Callahan, stopped me near the service hallway. He leaned in, eyes narrowed as if trying to place me. "You're the one who did his suit, aren't you?" I nodded, unsure what would follow. He exhaled, then said something I'll never forget. "That stitching on the shoulder, that's old school. My mother used to sew like that." His voice cracked just slightly. Men like him don't realize. The whole night rests on people like you. Then he walked off before I could respond. I stood there stunned. Not because I needed validation, but because someone had noticed. Someone saw me, even if just through the thread. I looked back toward the ballroom, where the music had resumed, and couples swirled across the floor like everything was perfect. But I knew the truth, hiding beneath his polished speech and expensive shoes. He stood on a platform built, not just from ambition, but from the sacrifices of people like me, people too humble to ask for credit, and too proud to beg for acknowledgement. That moment with Mr. Callahan stayed with me. It reminded me that even the smallest stitch leaves a mark. And even if the man wearing the suit forgets, the thread always remembers. It wasn't glory I wanted. It was to matter to, not be treated. Like a pair of hands that could be discarded once the job was done. And in that moment, I started wondering what it would look like to stop stitching for others and start building something of my own. I stepped outside into the cool night air, letting the noise of the gala fade behind me. My fingers still sore from the marathon of tailoring 2 nights before, curled instinctively as if searching for fabric. All around me, the city buzzed, cars passing, laughter from distant diners, but I stood still, grounded in something heavier than exhaustion. That night, as he took credit, as he shined under chandeliers in the suit I'd crafted by hand, something inside me quietly unraveled. Not from bitterness, but from release. I remembered sitting at my kitchen table, measuring, cutting, reworking, the lapels under weak yellow light, whispering to myself that it would all be worth it. That maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment he'd look back and say, "She made this happen," but he didn't. He never had. And maybe he never would. So I stood beneath a street lamp, pulled my scarf tighter, and realized I was done stitching dreams into suits for people who couldn't even name the color thread. The world didn't need another silent helper hiding in the background. It needed someone who remembered how much she gave and stopped apologizing for wanting more. In that stillness, I didn't cry, I didn't curse, I just breathed. For the first time, I didn't carry the weight of being just the woman behind the curtain. I was the one who could write her own pattern now, the one who knew every cut, every seam and could finally start sewing for herself. He could have his applause. I'd rather have my name. The next morning, I returned to the studio, not for him, not for another late-night favor, but for me. The same space where I used to hem suits with tired eyes now felt different, like the air had shifted. I brewed tea instead of coffee, lit a candle instead of switching on the overheads, and let myself breathe. My hands found the fabric again, but this time it was a dress, a soft ocean blue one I had sketched years ago and never dared to make. I traced the outline slowly, not rushing, not pleasing anyone but myself. I didn't know where I would wear it or if anyone would ever see it. That wasn't the point. Each stitch felt like a reclamation, not just of cloth, but of all the moments I had handed away without acknowledgement. The messages from the gala started coming, in photos, tags, people praising how perfect he looked. No one asked who tailored the suit, and for the first time, that didn't hurt. It confirmed what I already knew. I was invisible by design. Not anymore. I pulled out the guest list from the event, not for revenge, but to remind myself who was worth showing up for and who wasn't. I marked my calendar not with their events, but with fabric markets, open exhibitions, a possible class I could teach. My life had been patterned around his needs for too long. Now it would follow my lines, my colors, my dot measurements. That afternoon, I received an unexpected knock. It was the intern from the event team, the young woman who'd quietly watched me iron lapels backstage while everyone else fussed over champagne and camera angles. She handed me a handwritten note, cheeks flushed. "I thought you should know," she said before hurrying off. The note was from one of the gala organizers. They'd learned I was the one behind the suit. The writing was formal, polished, but between the lines, I could feel the tension, something about how next year's event would benefit from independent couture craftsmanship. At first, I wanted to crumple the letter, not out of anger, but because it felt too late. A token of recognition after a lifetime of silence. But then I realized it was more than that. It was proof. Proof that even from the shadows my work had shaped their stage. The intern had noticed, the organizer had noticed, and maybe, just maybe, it was time I started allowing the world to see me too. I pinned the letter above my sewing table, not for validation, but as a line I would never cross backward again. I wasn't just the woman behind the needle. I was the one who made people shine, who stitched their confidence into seams, and now I'd do that for myself. I began reworking the hem of my old coat, replacing every hidden stitch with something visible, something bold. Because invisibility was never humility. It was just the silence they trained me to accept, and I was finally done accepting it. The night before the closing ceremony, I didn't sleep. Instead, I stayed in my workspace, ironing, steaming, stitching. Not for someone else this time, but for me. I repurposed the leftover satin from his suit, crafting a fitted vest lined with the same emerald silk I'd used for his lapel. It wasn't flashy, but it was sharp precise. Every seam told a story only I could translate. When I arrived at the gala's final reception, no one recognized me at first. Not without my apron, not without their tasks pinned to my hands. But when I stepped into the light beside the silent auction table, carrying a small portfolio of my work, there was a shift. People whispered, some tilted their heads doing the mental math, and then I saw him standing beside his fiancée, wearing the very suit I had tailored, proudly accepting compliments. But when he turned and saw me, holding my own name printed on the design submission forms, something in his expression cracked. Not anger, not shame, something closer to panic, because he knew my work, my hands, my patience had been his polish all along. I wasn't asking for applause. I wasn't demanding credit. I simply stood there, unmistakably myself. While the room caught up to the truth, a reporter took my photo, a stylist asked for my card, and I, for the first time in years, introduced myself without explaining who I made things for, just who I was, because even the quietest hands can reshape an entire room if they stop waiting to be invited. He approached me later after most of the guests had filtered out, and the glittering din of the night gave way to silence. His bow tie was undone, jacket slung over one shoulder, and the confidence he usually wore like armor had faded into something brittle. "I didn't know you were coming," he said, voice low but uneven. I nodded, not as acknowledgement, but as a courtesy, only now realizing the weight of what he had worn. "You were always good with your hands," he added, like that was praise, like that excused anything. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence between us said enough. All the nights I hemmed in secret, all the mornings I ironed seams, while he rehearsed speeches about doing everything on his own, not from him, but from the illusion that what I gave had to be hidden to have value. He offered a half apology, wrapped in justification, but I stepped past him before he could finish. In my bag I carried something more important than his words, a signed interest letter from one of the designers at the gala. They wanted to feature my pieces, my name, not his. And as I walked toward the door, heels quiet on marble, I knew I'd never again be the invisible thread holding someone else's fabric together. The hallway outside was colder. It grounded me. As I stepped toward the valet station, the lights of the gala shimmered behind me like a past life, distant, blurred, irrelevant. I didn't turn back. I thought of the years I spent shaping his image, fitting his shirts for interviews, mending his slacks before board meetings, adjusting collars so he'd look the part. But when he thanked the world, he forgot the hands that stitched his presence together. That night, while everyone applauded him, I slipped out not in shame, but with something stronger clarity. I wasn't just someone who sewed, I was someone who created not only garments but futures. Outside, the driver greeted me by name. It was my name on the car booking, my name on the gallery submission form I'd mailed the week before. Not for reassurance, but for celebration. Silence, through invisibility. I got into the car without haste. I was no longer in anyone's shadow. As the car pulled away, I saw him in the glass reflection still, in the doorway, still watching, and maybe for the first time he realized that too. The next morning, before the sun even touched the city skyline, I opened the envelope that had waited patiently on my kitchen counter for weeks. Inside was the official letter from the Parsons Alumni Committee. My collection had been accepted into their showcase. For years, I had only designed in silence, behind curtains, under someone else's name. But not anymore. My initials would be stitched into every label. My story would no longer be told through someone else's spotlight. It would walk the runway in its own right. I took the old sewing machine from under its plastic cover, ran my hands over its worn metal, and smiled. The same hands that once hemmed suits for borrowed dreams would now shape pieces born from truth, not out of duty but desire. As I prepared the first piece for the exhibit, I paused only once to pull a photograph from the drawer. It was him. Years ago, smiling in a suit I had sewn in one night, just like the one he wore at the gala. Then I placed it in a box and closed the lid. Closure wasn't about erasing the past, it was about releasing it. When they thanked him that night, he looked polished, flawless. But now, I had something better than applause. I had authorship, I had peace, and I had my name finally stitched where it always belonged. After all that, do you think he ever wondered who taught him to shine?